Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I wanted to try out something a little different, which I'm not even sure I know how to do, and that's a reading vlog. I'm just beginning all my books for the semester, and the first one I'm reading for my course on Vladimir Nabokov is The Defense, or the Luzhin Defense. We just started this. I'm about 2.5 chapters in, so early on, but I can just tell I really, really like this book. I read Invitation to a Beheading by him before, and I didn't enjoy that book very much. But in class, my professor basically said, most of these translations are great, Invitation to a Beheading is not. It was done by his son when he was young, and he didn't really know what he was doing. Obviously that's just her opinion, but I can certainly tell a difference between Invitation to a Beheading and the Luzhin Defense. And this writing is so, so good. And I kind of just want to track it, especially since I know I'm going to be reading it consistently for class. And yeah, so the foreword is very interesting. Nabokov has a lot of rules that he wrote this foreword specifically for the 1963 English translation, which he took part in. But he really spoils his own book and is making sure that the reader is reading it how he wants them to read it. It's very interesting, and from what we're learning in class, it seems like he kind of put on this character, but it also seems like he really does want you to listen to him and read his books how he wants you to read them. And I've just never seen, I can't imagine being at that stage of being such a big author that I can be like, well, I'm going to make fun of this reader for reading it this way and make fun of this reader for reading it this way, and I've got thousands, hundreds of thousands left over. So it's a pretty interesting foreword and just a pretty interesting concept in general. But anyway, the book is about Luzhin Jr. His father's also Luzhin, and he is a young boy. It kind of starts off, I believe, with him being told that he's going to have to go to school now, and he doesn't really understand it at first, but he's already leaving this country home. His family is well off. They have a country home and a city home. And they're going back to Moscow, is it? It's really interesting because he writes this book. It's set in like pre-revolutionary Russia, which is long gone at the time. And it's sort of this nostalgic feeling that he's trying to evoke. He obviously didn't write this for people who were actually in Russia, because this wasn't going to get published. So if you're writing something in Russian from, maybe he was in Germany, I think, in Germany, you're writing it for people who speak Russian but have immigrated, and kind of playing with that nostalgic feeling they're going to have for the past. And Nabokov certainly was very nostalgic for his own childhood, not necessarily the way that pre-revolutionary Russia was, although he obviously wasn't happy with the direction it went afterwards either. Anyway, it seems like he's really focusing on the psychology of Luzhin. He's very interested in child psychology, and there's no reason to diagnose any characters, but and I don't even think it existed at this time. But Luzhin is, immediately you get that his mother can't touch him. He's very afraid of physical contact. His mother, with a mewing sound, was about to reach out and arrange his cloak, but noticing the look in his eyes, she swiftly snatched her hand back and merely indicated with a twiddle of her fingers in midair. Close it up, close it tighter. The boy did not stir. And that continues to happen throughout. I'm not sure if I have all the pages marked, but there's a couple where that happens. You get that he's very afraid of change. So now he's leaving this country home, which he already hates. And once he fully realizes what happens with school, he just takes off. And he hides, he runs into the woods, he runs all the way back to their country home and he's like, I'm going to stay here. And again, his mother and father can't actually get him out. When they come back, they have to get a black-bearded peasant, I think is how the man is described, who works at the mill. And he comes in and he just isn't afraid to approach Luzhin and takes him. So it's very interesting, though. It is really intentional. One of Nabokov's principal rules of writing is that nothing is an accident. And so when he hints at here 23, a cracked chessboard, or whatever the case may be, it's so intentional. So in that way, his instructions for reading are kind of important. But yeah, then he got up from the ground, found a familiar footpath, and stumbling over roots, started to run with vague, vengeful thoughts of getting back to the manor. He would hide there, he would spend the winter there, subsisting on cheese and jam from the pantry. Yeah, so it's really interesting the way that this happens. And the point that I'm at right now, he has become, he's also super interested in patterns. There's plenty of times where he goes to school. His father has this thought that his son is a genius. But his father's a famous writer, but kind of a children's teenage book writer. And Nabokov looks down on that. So he kind of prescribes him as a hack writer, someone who isn't really good enough to have any actual thoughts. There's plenty of references to how he can't appreciate actual music and just kind of putting on a show, watching the pianist hands instead of listening to the actual pianist's music at the shows he goes to. So he really looks down upon that, and Luzhin does as well as the character. He believes his father is a hack, and his father sees him as a genius, but not in the way that Luzhin actually is, which is he sees patterns in everything. Every little thing kind of consumes him, and while he is terrible at math in school, he's studying textbooks outside of it. And they're described as having everything that school lacks. So he really is interested in things, but it doesn't fit for him in school. It just doesn't work. And he's also bullied by everyone. So he just has a really rough time. So in love with patterns, really bad socially, afraid of physical contact, runs from everything he fears. He's really setting up an interesting character here. And at the point I'm at right now, he's decided to try and play chess with his aunt, who no longer is able to speak. There's this really weird thing that happened, and I can't wait to go to class and kind of figure out what's going on with his aunt and his father and his mother. I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but it's strange. And now his aunt doesn't speak to them, or now they don't speak to his aunt, whatever the case is. But he goes over to his aunt's house because he knows she knows how to play chess, and he's discovered a chessboard in his father's study, takes it. His father doesn't even notice it's gone, even though it's this beautiful gift that he received, and he's just skipping school. So Luzhin is leaving school. He's going to his aunt's every day, making up various excuses, and his father's just found out, and that's kind of at the point I'm at, and he just doesn't really know how to punish him, and I don't think Luzhin really cares if his father does punish him. But yeah, this is a really good book so far, and I'm really excited to get through it and talk about it more. And yeah, it's super, super good, and I don't think I was expecting that. Maybe just because I'd only read Invitation to a Beheading, which was a really interesting story, but the words, it just didn't seem to flow well. I just didn't enjoy the experience as much. But I'm super excited for this class, and we'll definitely want to discuss this one more. So yeah, I'll be back soon with more thoughts. Okay, so I'm now halfway through this book. Some really cool stuff has happened. I'm loving it just as much as last time. I've read chapters 4, 5, and 6 since last talking about this, I believe. I think what happens in chapter 4 was Luzhin got sick, and he ended up going to this German resort outside of Berlin. And his father was hoping he'd be separate from all this chess nonsense, if you will. But it turns out there's a huge tournament there. And so he played. I can't remember if he won or not, but he did really well. He's in all the papers. Now this is kind of like his name is known around the world as like this child prodigy, in the chess community at least. And it's really interesting because the father is kind of taking advantage of this fame, but his literature out there. And so 4 is kind of all those events. And then in chapter 5, which is his father's chapter, his father is kind of, the way he jumps ahead in time in this book is crazy, because he really gets you in a trance with these kinds of images that he's evoking, the way he makes you feel, and then it's like a sentence. It'll be like 16 or so years later. I forget what it actually was, but it was something like that. And he does it a couple times where he switches time periods or who's telling the story. And I really am like it all makes sense when he does it, and I don't really even notice. It's pretty crazy when we talk about some of these things in class. But in chapter 5, his father's reckoning with the life that he's lived in relation to his son. Luzhin Sr., many years later, in the years when his every contribution to the newspapers seemed to be his own swan song, and goodness knows how many of these swan songs there were, full of lyricism and misprints. Planned to write a novella, precisely about such a chess-playing small boy. So he's trying to write a novella to try and understand his son. At this point, they went 11 years, I believe, without talking. Nabokov kind of glazes over the World War I, or the Great War, as well as the 1917 Russian Revolution, which is kind of interesting the way he plays with it. So you can kind of feel sympathy for his father, but it's not really meant to be felt in the way that you read the book and the way that things turned out. And so you're kind of moving forward because, is it in chapter 4? I mean, I'm sorry, but the way that things are going back and forth just confuses me. But at this point, Luzhin Jr. is an old man, not an old man actually, he's only 16 years old or whatever it is, but he's fat, he's messed up, he can't talk to people, he's got a cane, he's just in bad shape, and his father's trying to kind of, I guess, absolve himself from the guilt he feels for how his son turned out. And it's, it's easy to be like, okay, I can't communicate with this kid, even if it's my child, like he's a little odd, things just aren't right. But when he's a grown man, I still can't communicate with him, like something is wrong there. And so he's trying to absolve himself, I feel like, of that guilt. And he's trying to write this novella. And maybe I mentioned this before, but Luzhin Sr. saw his son as a prodigy, but like more of a musical prodigy. That was kind of his ideal. And so he's trying to write this novella about a chess-playing young boy, and it doesn't work. It's like they're talking about everything that went wrong. The writer Luzhin did not himself notice the stylized nature of his recollection, nor did he notice that he had endowed his son with the features of a musical rather than a chess-playing prodigy. So he can't even accept the way that his son is, even if he throws chess into this novella. And he also wants to kill this character off. He doesn't recognize why, but the reader knows why. He wants to kill his character off in childhood so that he never reaches that old man age, or that older age that Luzhin is at now, where things seem horribly wrong. So he's trying to idealize this awful situation. And yeah, I mean, it's a mess. And what Nabokov is doing, probably selfishly, is we already know he views children's and teenage writers as writers who couldn't actually create good art. And it's kind of showing that like his failing in art is his failing as a person. He can't understand something through art. He couldn't understand it as a father. And at the same time, the story that he's trying to write is the one that Nabokov is writing. So Nabokov is trying to basically show off like, oh, this guy couldn't do it. Look at me, I'm doing this and doing it very well. Obviously, that's true. But it's just an interesting way to go about bragging about your work in your work. It's just, it's funny. I also realized there's a bunch of events with his parents, namely his father and mother, that I've glossed over. But because I feel like I'm spoiling enough, I'll just leave that. So at least there's some things that if you watch this whole video somehow and you wind up reading the book, that will be maybe somewhat of a surprise. But yes, I know I am spoiling most things. I apologize, but I think it can actually be, like, the writing is such an experience, and I won't read someone if the writing itself isn't enough experience, even if you go in knowing all these things. I think it's actually cool because there's things I didn't know going in that I kind of wish I did. Like, I'll learn in class and then be like, there's one scene in chapter 6 which describes assault basically by the older Luzhin towards his fiance, and when you're reading it the first time, you really can't tell. I mean, my teacher even said like she didn't know the first 2 times she read this book what was actually happening there. And it's a really interesting way to write it because it's like you're in the woman's perspective viewing his face. It's fascinating. So that, I'm not going to dive too deeply into that part, but the way he definitely does some really interesting things, and it's just the precision and the accuracy and not the accuracy, but like the purpose, like the way he attacks his writing with such intent is just really impressive. There's so many like hidden things that kind of tie back. When he meets this woman, we learn that her geography teacher was also his geography teacher in 2 separate schools, that this man who lost his arm in the war, she liked, and he went to class with that guy when he was a boy, and you don't even really realize this when you're reading it. It's such little hints, but it's really, really fascinating. So anyway, chapter 6 is basically you hop towards Luzhin is now back at the German resort where he was with his father when he was winning all these tournaments, and he's there for a tournament again. And this woman, finds him fascinating. At first it seems like because he's mysterious and famous, and like she learns his name and everybody's talking about how famous he is. And it's kind of just like this natural intrigue. But as she begins trying to interact with him, which doesn't go all that well, she essentially is it's more pity than love. She's just kind of taking pity on him. She feels bad that he can't interact, and it kind of dives into the ways in which she feels about all these different situations and all these different kinds of people, how bad she feels and how she takes pity on things, and then before basically being like, well, this is why she liked him. And so it's pretty sad. I mean, in a way, yeah, tender pity for the creature whose life is helpless and unhappy. Yeah, like it sucks, but he's also just not a good guy. And I mean, clearly what Nabokov is interested in is how his childhood turned him into this guy. It's not at all what I would have expected. I'm not sure why. I mean, it makes sense if you have an awful childhood to struggle as an adult, but obviously there's a lot of instances where, that kind of has the opposite effect. I don't really know. It's a really interesting exploration of childhood psychology, I guess, which seems to be what he's most interested in, and how that manifests itself in this man who I don't have as much sympathy for the man as I do the kid, right? And it's interesting because do you see the kid in the man when you're reading about the man? It's like as it switches back and forth, your emotional reaction changes. It's quite fascinating. I mean, I just, again, like I'm halfway through, I really would recommend this book. What he does with the woman here, who actually doesn't have a name, which is something else he does interestingly. Like Luzhin isn't really a name. Like it's not the full Russian name with the patronymic, and it's just they just give him one name, and him and his dad both have the same name. There's no real way, you're not really meeting him as a person. And then she doesn't have a name at all, which is, I mean, maybe she does eventually, but yeah, so he really can't interact with people. He really is struggling, and the way that Nabokov goes back and forth in time, and who's narrating? It's like her, then him, then back to her. Yeah, I mean, it's just the way he does it flows so well. So 6 was kind of a heavily informative chapter. A lot happened. But yeah, like even as much as I've spoiled, like it's still fascinating so far, and I would never in a million years think I want to read a novel about a chess prodigy who's like interested in kind of like math and patterns. That's really not my kind of thing, but I mean, it's just the writing. The beautiful thing about a good novel is it takes one super small issue or like theme, and it finds a way to comment on all these different areas of life as a whole, and that's really what he's doing here, and that's why I find it so appealing. And so yeah, I mean, I'm beyond excited to read the rest of his stuff, but yeah, I'll check back in as soon as I read a few more chapters. All right, welcome back everyone. I have been busy out of my mind, so I was not able to film another part of this video until I finished the book. So we finished it, talked about the ending in class, and the next Nabokov book I'm reading, which I just started just now, chapter 1 is Despair. This one is wildly confusing compared to the Luzhin Defense. So far, I mean, I don't even know, like, the amount of times that the narrator has just told a lie, continued on for another page, and like, oh, by the way, I was lying about that. It wasn't really sunny and 80 degrees outside. It was actually winter, but I said that because I felt like it. Like, it's just weird stuff is happening. He goes on and on about how he met a man who looks like him, and now it seems like everyone's starting to look like him. It was a mind-testing first chapter, so this is interesting for sure. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I guess I'm excited to read more and see what develops. But a little scared for sure. It seems like it could be a bit of a difficult read. But anyway, so the second half of the Luzhin Defense, not as good as the first half, still very good. But I don't know, with Nabokov, I enjoy the way he writes events when things are really, really happening. And although he has great insight into the characters, I enjoy it most when it's mixed in with events and things happening. And in the second half of this novel, Luzhin is basically losing his mind. Everything is chess to him. He's being forced to not play chess. And I'm going to do a chapter by chapter kind of thing. But basically, he ended up marrying his fiancée. I don't know if they were engaged the last time I read, but that woman who remained unnamed, she's now Mrs. Luzhin. But that's the only name she gets. And we actually learn Luzhin's name on the last page, like his first and patronymic, like the Russian name, on the last line of the novel, which is really interesting. I'm not going to spoil the ending here. It is absolutely fascinating. But basically, as I was saying, everything has become chess to him. And he's not actually playing chess in real life, and maybe that's part of why this is happening, but the entire world, life, essentially, is a zero-sum game. And I've already talked about how fascinating he finds patterns and things, so everything's a pattern to him. It's kind of like the world is trying to beat him, and he's noticing this repetition, and he's trying to find out a way to beat life. And I mean, he feels like he's basically being attacked, and he's trying to come up with the defense, which is what the Luzhin defense is, but the defense is kind of against life, I guess you could say. So I think I left off on chapter 8 or 9. He was playing a man named Tarati. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically these were like the two best players in the world. And time ran out, something like that, and they needed to resume the game the next day. And at the end of that game, or like the pause in the game, when they're leaving for the night, Luzhin starts losing it. And you kind of start to see, you're basically in the mind of a character that's petering out. I mean, his mind is just disintegrating. He is losing it. And at the end of the chapter, I don't actually remember what the line is, but you're kind of left with the feeling that he might be dead. Yeah, here it is. He stretched out a hand to the fence, but at this point, triumphant pain began to overwhelm him, pressing down from above on his skull, and it was as if he were becoming flatter and flatter, and then he soundlessly dissipated. So you kind of, and I don't think that's a huge spoiler because the main character is not really going to die in the middle, but you do kind of question it for a second, so apologies if I ruined that for anybody, but because the next chapter starts from the perspective of German men who, it's kind of funny. It's one of those things where it's weird humor. These German men are very drunk. They're with their buddy who's drunk, and they find Luzhin on the ground somewhere, and they think they send him home in a cab, but really they send their buddy home in a cab. So they look in their buddy's pocket, which is really Luzhin's pocket, and they find like a dress, so they take him there, and they're calling out to it's his wife's parents' house. And so they're calling out like this German name, and they don't know what's going on, and then they see Luzhin. And basically the parents are not happy. The mother already doesn't like him. That's kind of a disaster. There's a whole thing between the mother and daughter, the mother and Luzhin. She basically sees a chess player as not going anywhere, although once she like realizes he's a bit famous, she starts to warm up a little bit. But he's kind of an oaf, and so you kind of understand where the mother is coming from. But at the same time, as soon as he asks the mother for her daughter's hand in marriage, she's all of a sudden like, oh my god, maybe he is okay. Like, so she's very just like traditionalist, and maybe that's the angle she's coming from more so than this guy's just an idiot. It's more so that he has like a new age occupation. She mentions like in her day, nobody could have played chess, and so she doesn't like him. So it's a weird little dynamic. But the parents aren't happy. The daughter, as I mentioned, really takes pity on him. So this is almost exciting for her. She's like glad that she has to take care of Luzhin, which is kind of a mess. That whole relationship is really tricky because they never really discuss anything. They mention a couple times that she doesn't know anything about Luzhin's childhood. And after his father's died, she wants to visit his father's grave with him. She doesn't know at all that he resented his father. She kind of comes up with all these like beautiful memories that he has in his childhood, and he kind of just agrees. His father coming home from hunting early in the morning, and all these things that just never happened. And so it's a really tricky situation, and kind of shows the kind of communication that is missing from their relationship. But when he arrives home, and it is really cool that it starts from the German men's perspective, because you are kind of not sure if he died or not. But when he arrives home, everybody thinks he's drunk, but the reader knows, and this happens a couple times in this novel where the reader knows way more than the characters, we know he's just having a psychological breakdown. And so he goes to a doctor. The doctor doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just like, you can't play chess anymore, it's bad for you. And again, the reader knows that chess is all that's really let Luzhin succeed in life. Not even succeed, but just kind of like stay alive. He would have no place in society without chess. He would have no enjoyment without chess. I mean, he hated his childhood. Only once he found chess did things start going well. And at this point, he's just not in great shape, and so they think chess is the problem. But really, you kind of know that taking away chess isn't going to do much of anything. We learn a lot about Valentinov in these couple chapters, who's basically a guy that found out about Luzhin, took him away from his dad, exploited him, and then left him once the hot new thing came along. So kind of like an agent type thing who helped him succeed but really didn't prepare him anymore for life, and somebody he probably trusted, and things didn't go well. Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. So although the wife and Luzhin don't have great communication, it's actually the doctor who assumes that he had a perfect childhood and brings up the father and the hunting and all these things. And so that's part of the problem too, is that the doctor doesn't know anything because the people who are taking Luzhin in, the wife and her parents, don't know anything. And so it's just really tough. And something that we learned in class is that Luzhin was heavily against not just Freud. He was very against Freud, which, fair, but he was heavily against, I guess, psychology as a practice, therapy. He kind of just made fun of anything relating to contemporary psychology at the time, which I think is a bit more of a complex thing than he was giving it credit to. But while it's something he's clearly interested in, the approach that people were taking at the time, or probably are taking now, it's not something that he agreed with. So that's kind of fascinating in a way, reading the book, knowing that. I think it's something he addresses a couple more times, my teacher said, in some of these other books. But as soon as he gives up chess, essentially, he just has a complete void in his life. And the fiancé is taking care of him, and he's trying to get by, but it's still kind of in the back of his mind. And his wife, I think she's not actually his wife. They get married right after this in chapter 11. So all this happens, then they get married after he's kind of given up chess. And it's kind of described that the physical and the mental side of Luzhin is just fully separated at this point. He's like an oaf, just bumbling around. He's described as very childlike, even his outlook. And I love the way that Nabokov writes this. In a rudimentary jacket minus one sleeve, Luzhin, who was being renovated, stood in profile before a cheval glass, while a bald-headed tailor either chalked his shoulder and back or else jabbed pins into him, which he took with astonishing deftness from his mouth, where they seem to grow naturally. So you're kind of getting, I love that the third person, because he switches perspectives a lot, but the third person almost kind of acts as a first person a lot of the time. And so you can tell when something is being said in third person, but it's actually being said out loud, even if it's not characterized as dialogue. And you can also tell what thoughts belong to the narrator versus the character. And yeah, that void is so existent. Thus, in the most pleasant manner possible, people and things around him tried to adorn the emptiness of Luzhin's life. But at unavoidable moments of solitude during his engagement, late at night or early in the morning, there would be a sensation of strange emptiness, as if the colorful jigsaw puzzle done on the tablecloth had proved to contain curiously shaped blank spots. And once again he dreamt he saw Tarati sitting with his back to him, deep in thought, leaning on one arm. So he's still thinking about chess, and all these things are happening. There's family all around with the wedding. His wife's trying to get intellectuals around him. He's not interested at all in that. So that some of those scenes are kind of fascinating to read. I'm not sure if I can find them, but I don't even know what he was doing here. A cube? He was making a cube out of, maybe drawing a cube. He's drawing at this point. Finished, he said, holding the paper away from him and looking at the completed cube through his eyelashes. His father-in-law put on his pince-nez and looked at it for a long time, nodding his head. His mother-in-law and wife came from the drawing room and also looked. It even cast a tiny shadow, said his wife. A very, very handsome cube. Well done, you're a real cubist, said his mother-in-law. Luzhin, smiling on one side of his mouth, took the drawing and looked around the... So, finished, look at the cube I drew, oh, you're a real cubist. He's a little kid at this point, and it's nuts. And that sympathy that you don't feel for the adult is kind of creeping back in. At the same time, you're forced to think about what's really best for him in that situation. And the reader knows this is never going to succeed. What's happening right now is never going to work. He can't just be a married man who winds up getting a job at some bank or wherever the father-in-law works, which is what they want to happen. It's an absolute mess. And in every room he walks into, he's seeing chess, he's thinking about it. Even when he begins to kind of try out what the doctor's saying, and he's not actually thinking about chess, or he's actively trying to avoid thinking about chess, the way he describes the world, it's so clear. Everyone's out to get him. It's a win or lose game. It's just an absolute mess. And so, so he's doing something, he's busying himself with the newspaper, and presently would note with despair that he had been unwary again, and that a delicate move had just been made in his life, mercilessly continuing the fatal combination. Then he would decide to redouble his watchfulness and keep track of every second of his life, for traps could be everywhere. So he's really trying to, and eventually he decides, what do you do when traps are everywhere, when people are anticipating your every move? He basically decides to try and do crazy stuff out of the ordinary that the enemy or life or whoever he's playing in this game would never expect. And so some of those I can't say because it spoils something. But like one of them, he goes into a beauty salon, and he just goes in. He walks into this beauty salon for no reason. He sees a mannequin. He's like, I want to buy this mannequin. And the lady's like, it's not for sale. And so he pulls out a bunch of money, and he's like, I want to buy the mannequin. And then all of a sudden, he's like, oh my God, I've been here before. I've done this before. This is part of the pattern. And he just cannot escape the feeling that everything he does, he has no free will. So he feels like he has no free will, that everything is anticipated. Even walking into taking a cab to some random place, going into some random beauty salon and trying to buy a mannequin. It's like somebody knew he was going to do that, and that's how he feels. And so I'm not going to talk about the ending because I honestly do think, after talking about this, I like the second half a little bit more, but the first half was like a 5-star half a book for me, and I think this is probably a low 4 at this point. So I enjoy it. I think it's a truly fascinating thing to read. It's definitely the easiest I've only read Invitation to a Beheading and Part of Despair, but this one definitely seems like the easiest one to understand of Nabokov at this point. But yeah, I think I'm not going to do a reading vlog for every single one. Maybe Lolita or Pal Fire. I've learned my mistake. I mean, his writing's all very good, and so I'm going to be excited about all the books once I start. And I don't want to do 30 minutes on every single book. But yeah, so I'm trying to find time for the videos. I've started this. I've started Evgeny Onegin by Pushkin, which is, I was not expecting to like it this much. Incredible. So that'll be coming up, and then I'm gonna have a video on the hero of our time in Letters to a Young Poet, which I have like a page left in. And so yeah, so I would recommend this book. It wasn't perfect the whole way through. Some of it's definitely a bit confusing, but I think it's a very thought-provoking read, and one that could definitely spice up what you're reading. I think it's very cool. And so yeah, I will see you guys next time. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't talk about this too long and bore anyone to death, but yeah, I'm truly thankful for anybody who watched this the whole way through, for anybody who watched this at all. Thank you guys all for watching. It seemed like people really liked the last video, which was awesome. I'm going to try to do some more stuff related to my major, and then maybe some videos centered around writing and my writing habits soon as well. But yeah, thank you for watching.